Okay, I think maybe we'll get started. So I'm Sharon Leach. I am acting deputy, S4 year head, and some of you may know me more in my other role as the senior phase head of English. I am ably assisted by Mr. Grimmer this evening, who is also in the S4 year team, and he is going to try and keep me right with all the tech things that give me the absolute fear. As the kids know in assembly, I'm more worried about the tech than I am about anything else. So hopefully I'll be able to present things and you'll be able to see it okay. So the plan is to talk about study skills and how to study at home. I want to start with a few sort of caveats. Obviously, all pupils are individuals, they're different, they learn in different ways. So even though I'm about to say these ways don't work. It's according to research, but it doesn't mean necessarily it wouldn't work for your child, or if you're a pupil watching, it wouldn't work for you. What I'm going to try and explain tonight is what things are supposed to work and why, and also sometimes, depending on any specific needs or issues pupils have, it may require further modification and things like that. So it's just to give you all some idea of what scientific research says about how to learn effectively, and then almost do what you will with it. I have offered the fourth year. I did say, depending on who could come and who was coming tonight, that whilst this was intended more to help parents, I would try and offer something for the fourth year in the first instance, in person, to help them as well. No one really teaches you to study. It's more, Mr. Grimmer and I were talking about this today, it's more something you learn and develop the more studying you do. But obviously, the more confident you can feel in your study, especially, I'm a bit biased for my fourth year who are going into fabs and practicals, and some of them may have done a National 5 last year, but it was one National 5 potentially, whereas now they're heading into a situation where they will be doing lots of exams and have lots of demands on their time. And I'm hoping that some of the information I share with you tonight can help the really difficult position parents find themselves in when at 10 o'clock the night before a test, you're the one on the front line of a meltdown. I don't know anything, I don't know what I'm doing, and all that sort of thing. So I'm not saying I can stop that happening, but certainly it's that idea to try and help pupils and parents feel they know a little bit more about studying and things like that. When I present, I won't be able to see things quite so clearly. Google Meet has improved since the COVID days, but Mr. Grimmer's here to keep a wee eye. If you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat. I'm probably just going to plough straight through, and then hopefully I will have answered any questions, and if not, I'll be able to engage at the end, and you can unmute yourself or type them and things like that. So I hope all that kind of makes sense as an introduction, and we'll just get started and see how we got on. So I hope that seems okay. So here we go, the moment of truth. It worked when we were practicing, so hopefully you'll be able to see that, and Mr. Grimmer can drop me a text or unmute himself and let me know if not. So really, the aim tonight is to maybe understand a little bit more about how the brain learns and to explore how this impacts in revision strategies. Whilst teachers will do revision at school, it's often the revision pupils do at home that can be more challenging when they are responsible for coordinating it all as well. Like I say, they take 6 subjects, or up to 6 or 7 subjects, depending on what they're doing, and the commitments they have as a member of a family, and potentially sport and cultural commitments. So it's how they coordinate that time at home, which is often why parents can find themselves in the difficult position when pupils feel like they're really struggling. Usually at night, when it's a bit too late to expect a reply in Google Classroom from their teacher, or they feel they've run out of time to make it effective. So I'm hoping that will help with that and help create this idea of meaningful revision as well. So let's see how we got on. In terms of revision strategies, then, which are you familiar with? I've tried to take some of the more famous ones, and when we ask pupils, the top 2 are the things that we tend to get back a lot: rereading notes from class and highlighting information. but you also have things like revision cards, and there are a number of digital apps. I'm very old school. I like pen and paper and notebooks and things like that. Not surprising from someone with the English degree. But I know a lot of pupils like to use the digital apps and Quizlet and things like that on their iPads. Same idea. Self-testing, past papers, and using mind maps. So they were the main ones. I know there are more, but I didn't want to be overwhelming with a giant list. So I would say those are the ones we tend to hear more about from pupils. Now, in terms of which work, according to research, rereading your notes, just reading them, doesn't really work. And highlighting doesn't really work. And the reason for this is the passivity of it. Now, I'm going to be honest, the best way I studied at school was I copied out my notes again. And funnily enough, Mr. Grimmer said he did something similar. And copying is going to be in an awkward position. And you're going to notice, hopefully, that I have missed some of these aren't carried forward. And I'm going to come back to why, for example, past papers are missing. Don't worry, I will discuss past papers. But really, what it comes down to is how active or how passive your revision is. And what that means is, I don't know if you've ever seen pupils highlighting. Obviously, it happens in English quite a lot. And sometimes by the time they're finished highlighting, very little of the document is unhighlighted. So highlighting can work to draw your attention to things. And I'll be honest, I do that a lot when I'm reading. Like I did a lot of reading on what's working and what's not working, so that I was trying to give you all accurate information. But I tend to summarize a little note at the side. Now that is okay because I've actively put it in my own words. And you're all going to know as an English teacher, I'm obsessed with using own words and things like that from RUE. But that is you showing you understood it, where you're summarising it in a wee note. So I tend to highlight, make a wee note. That would be okay. What's not really working, and when I say okay, not okay, obviously, like I say, it really just depends on what works for you. But the idea of you're just looking at your notes. Now, obviously, as a member of the English department, I'm very aware of what reading can be. There is the passive reading where you're looking, and there's reading where you're actually taking it in. And I think parents will absolutely know what I'm talking about here, as will pupils. We all do it sometimes. I do it when I'm reading. Sometimes I realise I've been reading it, but I haven't been taking it in, and I've got to start again. And that absolutely happens to me as well. So it's this idea of, they say these things don't work if you are passively just regurgitating something and repeating it. So I kind of hope that makes sense. This is when being online is giving me real COVID flashbacks, where you don't always know if people are following you because you can't see people nodding along. But I hope that makes sense. What they do think works is things that are active. So if you're rewriting something, like I say, I tend to highlight and rewrite a short note, and then I skim through the notes at the side, and that reminds me. Revision cards, where you are actually, and I'm going to come to that as a strategy later on, where you've maybe got a question and an answer, or you've got notes where you have had to take the information. So for example, and some of my examples will be very English based at points because it's what I know best, but quotes from your Duffy poems, you're not taking the whole poem, you're not taking the whole annotation. What you are doing is taking quotes and then getting all the information in underneath. And that is the idea that you're having to think about what you're writing. So this aspect of self-testing is what's important. And the reason for that is it's to do with how the brain works. So I was trying to find quite a straightforward image. And this one here, the input, so the lesson or the topic or the information you've studied. And you know, I do not take for granted how challenging it is to be a pupil. I do forget sometimes, I think adults always do, that you can spend the day in maths, English, biology, French, PE, you know, and you're switching in and out of all these topics all day. But you're in your lesson and your teacher's teaching you something, or you're at home studying and you're going over your notes again. Now, you have your sensory memory, and that is your memory of being there. Now, for example, I'm sure I'll speak to many people where we've all sat in a meeting, for example, and we remember the person was talking, but we don't remember really what they said, or we remember being a bit bored and thinking about lunch, or we remember a joke our pal made, but we maybe don't remember everything all the facts that we were given that lesson. And that's your sensory memory where you remember being there. I'm simplifying this down. Please don't tell the psychology faculty, they'll murder me considering I used to oversee psychology as well. But simplistically, that's kind of what it is. And then we have short term memory. And this is where the things, the pupils that are listening in today, or even people from work today, the things that we remember from today or this week, the things that are very recent to us, the topics and things that you've been studying in school this week. For example, if you were doing a poem in English this week, as I know many of you will have been, that that will be in your short-term memory. Now, to get it in and out of the long-term memory, this bit here, retrieval and encoding, that's where all the learning happens. And this is why teachers often start with starters of what you did yesterday or what you did last week or a previous topic, because it is in this extraction from your long-term back into your short-term memory, apparently, that's where all this magic happens. And those of you that do that well are the ones that tend to be able to recall better what you've learned. So how do we do that? Now, teachers obviously spend a lot of time doing that. You know, we'll give you quizzes on things that you've done. We'll get you to redo things. Sometimes it's a test. Sometimes it's show me boards and Kahoots. It's that idea of you knew this, it's in your long-term memory, but it is the act of getting it out your long-term memory, retrieving it, that they say is so important. So that's why, and I'm sure if I ask any of you something like this, there's things you knew really well and then you forget them. You know, it's like I was learning French a few summers ago. I decided because I was going to France, I would relearn French. I hadn't really done it since school. And I did loads and I got really good at it. But see, if you ask me what the French word is for jumper or something, or don't know how to say go up the street and turn left, I've forgotten because I haven't extracted it. And it's why apps like Duolingo and Babbel have these daily tests where they pick random things, because it's that act of getting it out your brain that's important. And the other thing is how we remember things, because if you think about something like the times table from school, I think that's a really good example, like the times table and the alphabet and things from school. You didn't learn the times table, and parents here will know this as well. You know, when you were doing the times table with your children when they were young, you didn't just give them a bit of paper and get them a highlighter or copy it. You know, and I know I do it with my nephews. You know, it's like 2 times 2 is, you know, and we do little tests and things, and it's the act of, you know, getting it out your brain. And what I want to be very clear is getting it wrong. It is so important to accept that mistakes help you. They're not pleasant. No one likes making them. Many a member of staff at Larbert High will tell you I do not cope well with it when I make mistakes. But you do learn from the mistakes you make. And often because of the role of the sensory memory and the short-term memory and the long-term memory, that absolutely helps you remember, oh, that's why I got that wrong that time, or oh, that's not how you do that. And that can help as well. So to show you what I mean about the short-term memory, there's been a lot of work in educational circles on cognitive overload. The idea that it's really easy to feel like they have that they can't remember everything that they're being asked. And it's things like, if we look at this, so if you look at that for me for a second, so it begins with M and ends in B. Now, if I asked you to repeat that to me, it would be quite challenging, but some of you may have noticed it's actually not. If I say it out loud, suddenly it's much easier. MI6, 007, CIA, KGB. And you'll notice there I chunked it up into its little acronyms and things. Suddenly that's easier to understand. If I ask you right now to say to yourself, you're all muted anyway, I think, so even if you did it out loud, it wouldn't matter. What is your mobile phone number? And you'll chunk it up. For people as old as me that remember the joy of a landline back in the day, I'm sure you still remember your landline number from when you were young because you had to type, you know, dial it in all the time. I couldn't tell you my partner's mobile number now because I never type it, I just hit the button. So it's in that act of retrieving from your memory every time you dial a number, that sort of thing. Now, one of the more famous numbers, I hope we're enjoying the maths thing here, is this number. And obviously it's pi. And it's quite famous, you know, that very sort of excellent nerdy photographic memory people can remember the whole string of numbers. 3.14592653558. Now I'm already, I know I've not learned it. And the point is, it's because our short-term memory can't cope with that amount of information. So we'd need to chunk it up. So we can maybe do 141, 592, 653. I'm going to be honest, beyond that, I would start to collapse and it wouldn't be able to do it. Now, if these are simplistic examples here, but it's the idea that we chunk it, we break it up. But if I went back to that every day and added a bit more on, I probably could start to remember it all. And I think that is what I'm trying to get across about revision. So if we move away from the brain slightly here, in terms of retrieving information then, there's only so much information our working memory can cope with at one time. And I know at work sometimes, and I think we all have this, where we feel quite overwhelmed with everything, and you need to start prioritising and chunking things up. And revision in school is the same. Retrieving information is needed to retain information. I'm going to talk about cramming later on as well. Challenge is in honestly admitting what you know and what you don't. And I think sometimes what can be challenging for pupils is admitting sometimes what they've forgotten. Like it's some sort of failure that they have forgotten something. And we've all had it. And I've been teaching for over 2 decades now. You know, you teach something, the pupils have it nailed, you go back and, you know, a couple of weeks and they've forgotten it. But that is why that happens. And you've got to go back to do it again. Questions and tests and questions when you're studying are not the same thing. And I'm going to come to past papers, but it's that idea of an assessment and revision aren't the same. And I think sometimes pupils conflate both. Learning happens over time. There's a reason why, you know, we need these months in order for you to consolidate what you've learned. And we all forget things. Absolutely, we do. And mistakes happen. And I do feel quite strongly when I'm talking to the pupils about this. We shouldn't be ashamed or embarrassed about mistakes. Often the thing you muck up is the thing you remember and you never do it again. And really what you want, and I say to my English classes a lot, is you want to get the mistakes out of the way. You don't want to almost accidentally be doing well, and actually it's fortunate that you're not making a mistake and then make it in the exam. So any mistakes, you kind of want to get them out your system a little bit because you'll learn how to cope with that. And I'm not saying actively make them, absolutely not, but it's not something to fear, you know, it's something to build on. Everyone makes mistakes. No one gets full marks in every test they sit all the time. No one's asking for perfection. So I think that's really important. And there's going to be days where you feel you don't know what you're doing. There's going to be days where you feel like, I just don't get this. That is normal. The up and down is normal. Managing the emotion of studying is a whole other ball game. And that, as I said to them yesterday, is part of what school's for, you know, because it prepares us when we go to work and we're dealing with these things. So I don't underestimate the challenge of how difficult it is when you feel demoralised or you've made a mistake. But try and use it as a learning thing as well. Right, okay, I got that completely wrong. Why did I get it wrong? And move on. And your teachers, this isn't about all the studying you only do at home. I'm talking about home because that's important. But remember, you get a lot of support in school to help you as well. Now, when it comes to revising at home, I've got a couple of things I'm going to suggest. So things like a revision planner, how you organise your time and how you organise homework with that as well. And then creating revision materials. What do you do with them? So some pupils create the most gorgeous revision materials, but it's also what are you doing with them? Because if you make revision cards and you only use them the night before a test, that's probably not going to work. Also, parents often are like, I would like to help, but I don't know how. And, you know, let's not underestimate, sorry, how uncommunicative teenagers can be. You know, how was school? Fine. Got any homework? You know, I have a nephew who is now in 6th year. My eldest nephew's in 6th year. I know what to ask about English, and it feels like an interrogation sometimes, and that's with my secret teacher knowledge. So I totally sympathise sometimes with, I don't know where to begin, or by the time you are told there's an issue, it's very late. So I'm going to suggest how parents could be involved through the teaching each other Q&A sessions, but managing time effectively is really important, because I just want to say as well, for anyone who's sitting thinking, right, how much time is she expecting them to study? That is the other thing. I'm not suggesting for a minute that pupils should go home at 4 o'clock, potentially 3:30, 4 o'clock, whatever, and then study till they go to bed. That's not helpful either. So another thing I'm going to be looking at is, how do you use your time effectively? So let's talk about things you can do first, though. So revision cards and flashcards. Now, I do think these work quite well in English, and in things like classics and factual subjects like science and languages and things like that. But what are you putting on the card is important. Now, one thing that is suggested is put a question on one side, an answer or answers on the other. In English, there's never just one answer. It's its great strength and weakness. But in things like languages, there possibly is a correct answer, or science, there is an answer. And it does mean that someone else can test you, because what can happen sometimes is when you test yourself, you see what you meant. Not necessarily what you said, but that's what I meant. Okay, you know, and things like that. Or you might, now, I over the years have found pupils go into other camps. Some are far too hard on themselves, and if it's not perfect, they're quite brutal. 0, it's a disaster. And others are like, oh, I know what I meant, it's totally fine. You know, and it's that idea that sometimes someone else doing it with you, and it could be a friend, a sibling, you know, that sort of thing. I often say, for revising quotes in English, say them out loud. Poetry is meant to be heard, and we all have song lyrics of songs we don't even like from years ago trapped in our heads. You know, and you can revise your poems out loud with the dog, who's not going to judge you at all, and things like that. I would also recommend sometimes showing your revision cards to your teacher so that they can check you're putting the correct information on them, because there's no point relying on these cards and actually they're not quite right. So you could do that too. In terms of how to use them, could someone else test you, like I said? Would you be honest if you're alone? Now, also, the other thing is colour could be quite effective here. So if you've got topics in biology, for example, or chemistry, you could be using a certain colour of card or highlighter on the card so that you know that's on, I don't know, I'm going to make this up, plants or something like that. If you're revising French vocab, if you're revising words a bit like personal things like family and stuff's one colour, school's another, that sort of thing. Okay. And how often are you using them? Now, what can happen is it's so easy to be like, right, I've nailed that. I've nailed that French vocab. I got a test. I did really well. And you forget about it. Then it's in a test or it's in your fab, and actually you do quite badly in it because you've not looked at it since. So we do need to acknowledge the things we're struggling with, but we also can't take for granted the things we know, because like I say, it can come out of your memory. So an example could be this. You could have your flashcards, you could have 3 piles, or you could have 3 boxes or whatever, or digital ones, same idea. And you start with one pile. Now, you can either do it by topic, you could mix them up. It would depend on the subject and things. But what you could do is you have ones that you look at them. So you look at your flashcard, and when you get it correct, you could move it into the rarely or the weekly box. Now, if any of you have ever done these online languages, things like Babbel and things, that's exactly what they do. If you get things correct, so say you're acing clothes, words for skirt and blouse and trousers and things, then they give you a bit more rarely. And the words you get get wrong come up regularly until you've got them. So it's that idea of constantly in and out of your memory, as it were. So I hope that makes sense. So if you wanted to use revision cards, that is a way you could use them. And also it means you're not being overwhelmed looking at 50 million flashcards every night. And it's a short thing you can do, right? Let's do 10 flashcards, that sort of thing. It doesn't need to be like, let's do 10 flashcards from French. Let's do 10 from biology. It doesn't mean I'm going to learn the whole of PE tonight. Okay, because that's overwhelming, and where do you even start? So there are different ways of doing it. Or if you've got them coloured by topic and you think, right, that topic's coming up, you can get them out and go over them, maybe give them to your mum or dad, or, ask your child, look, what notes have you got? And they can test you that way. Now, I do believe testing others works. I know that I certainly found that. It's going to come as galloping shock that I then became a teacher, but I certainly found that useful. When I was doing higher history, for example, me and my friend would teach each other topics and things like that and tell each other about them. And you've got to listen though, and that's when it becomes active, because you've got to check that you're not being told something wrong, that they're getting it right, that there's that checking. Otherwise you're just passively listening, and that's not really going to be effective based on what I'm saying about passivity and activity. So I hope that kind of makes sense. So with flashcards, it's the idea of what's on them and how are you using them. Because I think sometimes with some pupils, they make them and then they think, what do I do with them? They look great, but what am I doing? And you could use these piles to help you check how good's your recall, how good is your retrieval. So I hope that makes sense for that. And that's what spacing means, because it's this idea that one of the most important things that's coming through research is spacing the revision. If you, for example, in English, they've got to learn the poems of Carol Ann Duffy. If you only revise one poem over and over and over again, and that poem isn't in the test, then okay, you're going to be okay for the 4 marks that'll work for. But the remaining 16 marks of that exam, what are you going to do because you've not learned the other poems? Now, no pupil in their right mind would ever do that. You would learn them all, and no one's asking you to memorise all 6, but you learn your quotes from all of them, and it's the same principle. So that idea that you actually are engaging with these topics, taking a break from it, going back to it, that sort of thing. And in classics, for example, which is a really content heavy subject, that's really, really important, because subjects can feel a little bit like in the days before we had iPads and Netflix and all this, in the olden days where, we had to play boring games, things like I am going on my holiday memory games. I am going on my holiday and in my suitcase there is sun cream. And then the next person is, I'm going on my holiday, sun cream and sunglasses. And you have to remember what everyone said before you and add something new on. Now, content subjects can be like that, where you've got this piece of knowledge, then you've got this piece and this piece and this piece. So you have to keep checking that you've not forgotten things, because you're only going to remember the thing that's most recent. I'm worried I'm over repeating this, but I hope that makes sense. Okay, so teach a friend then. Like I say, being able to explain or elaborate is key here. It's why it is a core skill in English. Being able to, if you've learned about Nazi Germany, teach someone about it. Now, I would recommend in this case, maybe not the dog, but someone who's listening, so they can check you did say things correctly and things like that. Now, someone at home could have your jotter if it's got, if it's something they can follow, because it's really hard. If my nephew was to rock up and say, here's my GraphCom notes, I don't really know anything about GraphCom, so it would need to be quite clear. But if you've got things like revision cards or clear revision notes from class, you can talk to mum or dad or a sibling or someone about what you've learned. So Hitler went to power in this year. He was a member of this party. This is what happened. Now, you've got your basic facts there, but then you can also start bringing in your analysis skills and things like that. Why is that significant? Or in class, we really need to know about, that sort of thing. And that allows you to help, so you can test with a pal or family. But remember, it does need checked. That's the only thing. So it may be, as a parent, what you can do is make a note of what they're telling you. So Hitler came to power in what year? You write it down, and then it can be checked, so that if they did say anything wrong, it does get picked up. But that idea of teaching the topic naturally was something I quite liked when I was young as well. But it's that idea of engaging, and we do remember things we hear more than things we read. Unless you're blessed with a photographic memory, you know, it's much easier when you're hearing things. In English, for example, I I can recite some of the Duffy poetry. I know you would all like me to. I'm not going to, but it's because I teach it every year. I know the lines, and because they're rhythmic and you're meant to hear them, you can repeat it. You teach Hamlet. I do know the to be or not to be speech, but that's because I've taught it and I just like showing off and things like that. But it's one of those things where it's hearing it can really help as well. So if you think, yeah, I'm really like, when I hear things that really helps, then use that. Absolutely. So I hope that helps. And as a parent, that could be something where you're learning about what they're learning as well. And when they come to do their critical essay in English, which will be a bit later this year for National 5 English, you could read the text, you could read the play or the novel and discuss it with them if you wanted, that sort of thing as well. With things like RUE, watching the news, I often say to my parents, you can watch the news. Can they put the main story in their own words without repeating the words of the news programme, like the big words and things like that? They're allowed to use common words, but could they tell you in their own words? Could they summarise it? Because they're key English skills. Not everything requires 4 hours and paper and a pen. So it's that way of trying to make revision short and interesting. Mind maps also can work quite well. I again would recommend colour to help you here. I've put a very basic clip art in here that doesn't have lines coming off, but in classics, I think they're essential. I can imagine in things like science, they would be really, really useful as well. They should be easy to read and easy to follow. All your notes it shouldn't be tiny writing, 3,000 words on a sheet, because you're not going to take that in. It needs to be prompts that remind you and spark the brain cells to retrieve that information so that you can then elaborate on it. So they should be easy to read and easy to follow, especially if you're asking mum or dad or someone to look at it and follow as and you say, right, tell me about plant biology, and they start telling you all about plant cells and things like that, and all the key terms they need and what it means. It should be clear. Because parents can't learn all the National Fives in conjunction with their children. They just can't. So it is that idea of being a helpful ear and helping them. But the reality is all the action should be happening in the child's brain. And hopefully parents will learn something as well. But it's not their job to learn the whole of the National 5 course of every subject their child's sitting. By all means do if you want, though. It's a good starter revision exercise to get a bit of paper and create a mind map of what do you know? What do you remember? So if I was doing it, for example, in my classics class, the first thing they learn is about is ancient religion in Greece. It could be things like the state, the nature of the gods and the nature of religion, and there's core vocabulary they need to know. So are they writing that down? That sort of thing. And I'll be honest, at Easter school, it's the first thing I do with them is make a mind map of the whole course, because we can immediately see where the problems are. Right, you totally forgot about that topic, you've completely forgot about that aspect of religion, or you've forgotten about that theme from the Odyssey. And it's a really good place as a check-in of what do I remember off the top of my head and what have I forgotten? And then you could go get your revision cards for that topic. So there's totally different ways of doing it. And as I said at the start, it's really important you find ways that work for you. So what have you remembered? What have you forgotten? And both are equally valid, okay? It's not a test. It's not something to beat yourself up over. I hope I've made it clear you're going to forget things, so it's how you remember them that's important. And then you can check your notes. You may have already made a perfect mind map. Then you could compare it. What is missing from your perfect mind map? It's the sort of thing perhaps you'll do in school before tests and when teachers are getting you to revise in class. What's missing? What have you remembered? And that can be quite helpful as well. And like I say, it could be a good prompt for a teach others task. So I've tried to pick things that are similar or could work together. So I hope that kind of makes sense. But like I say, that is a very, very basic mind map. You could have bits coming off it. You could use different coloured pens for things and stuff as well. Okay, past papers then. I said I would talk about past papers. I have nothing against them. I would say at this point in the year, it is really early to be talking about past papers. I also feel when parents ask me if they should buy them, of course you can. SQA have them for free with the answer schemes, which is why teachers can't use them as evidence. So as a rule, I might let pupils do past papers, but I don't really for RUE. I use them for Duffy, but I don't tend to use them for RUE so that pupils can just use them and not have to spend money on them. In terms of subjects, I have bought them for my nephews before. It's always a bit unclear how useful they've been or if he's used them. He's probably not going to tell me if he hadn't, but it's one of those things where it can seem active. Now, the only caveat I have with past papers is it's not studying, it's testing yourself. If you are doing it like it's a test, especially if you do it in time conditions, and I'm going to come to that in a minute, that is not revising, that's self-testing. And that's fine, but it's not revising. You are not going to learn from that. What you're doing is you're testing what you know, not then addressing, okay, I don't know what that is, or I've forgotten that. So it's a different thing. There is absolutely nothing wrong with past papers. I would, like I say, be cautious in October of doing it. You've got the whole year, and how I know in certain aspects, in certain subjects, it would be quite challenging because you've not maybe learned enough at this point to do a full past paper. What I would say though is it's what are you doing with it when you're finished? Now, if you're taking it off SQA, and the answers are there, you can attempt to mark your own. In English, it's actually quite hard. I do appreciate that. This is why English teachers love to complain about their marking, because there's so many possible right answers in English. So when I'm reading my pupils' answers, it's, okay, is that what is meant? It's, especially in own words, because of the amount of words we have in English, there'll be more than one word. If you think about the word go, there's a million words you could use instead of that. So have they used the right word? That sort of thing. So English can be a bit tricky for that. But in factual subjects, you probably could just bring it up and mark your own. Now, that is active. You're looking at what you did and how right it is. And again, it could be giving you an idea of what to go and study. Right, okay, I completely forgot all of that vocab. Oh, okay. They taught us in PE to do, Mr. Grimmer would need to fill me in a better example here, but they taught us these terms in PE and I've forgotten 3 of them. Okay, that's active. Just doing a past paper isn't really, unless you're doing it to practice time conditions. Now, if you're doing that, that's a bit different. And that is a valuable thing to do as you get nearer test, like FABs and especially the final exam. Especially in something like English where it's 90 minutes to do 2 things. Can you fit the 2 things in? In history, can you complete the full paper in whatever amount of time it is? It's, so that can be useful. But in terms of revision, that's not revision, okay? So we do get a lot of people say, I've done a past paper, or I'm going to do past papers. But I often ask, what are you doing with a past paper? Also, the issue with past papers is teachers can't really have everyone in the class do a different past paper and expect it to be marked. And that can always be a bit tricky, where you're suddenly given the 2020, 2021, 2022, and things like that. So sometimes teachers may give out a past paper. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that at all. It's absolutely fine. I just want you to think about what is the point of what you're doing, because I'm going to talk about how much time you should spend on revising shortly. So I hope this kind of makes sense. So are you marking your own so you can see the answers? Also, if you don't know what you're doing and you're completely screwing it up, it might be a good idea to stop if you think, oh my god, I know I'm doing this wrong, to check But if you can bring up the answers, you can check. And if it's homework for a teacher, I'm not suggesting you do that. But I hope that makes sense. Like, how are you using the past papers? What's important here? Are you targeting certain questions? So, for example, if you're doing something like higher media, are you what questions are you doing? Are you going after a certain type of question? Are you doing all the genre questions? Are you what is it that you're aiming to do? If you're doing something like RUE, are you only doing the analysis questions to get better at those rather than try to do the whole past paper? And I often encourage pupils to do that. If they're doing past papers, pick out the questions that are causing you bother. Sometimes we only do the own words questions because so many of them are own words. You're looking for topics that regularly come up as well. So you're bringing them up, you think, right, that came up that year, that came up that year. Teachers will also be very good at telling you the things that come up as well. So that can help as well. So I'm not saying don't use them. I'm just saying maybe think about what you're using them for. Because obviously you're in your room, you're writing away, you're writing for hours, you're working really hard. That's fine. But if that just sits in your desk done, no one looks at it, the teacher's not got time to look at it or hasn't even known you've done it, or you don't even look at it again, what was the point of it? Now, unless it's for time conditions, and even then, how correct was it in the time? But unless you're using it for time, just think about what is the point. So I hope that makes sense. Because I don't want you to think, well, Miss Leach did this thing last night. She told us past papers will waste time. Absolutely not saying that. But I'm also saying it's very early in the year. So think about what the point of it is. Okay, I talked about timing because I think it's really important because I can imagine some of you are thinking, right, okay, are they supposed to work all day Saturday, all day Sunday, Monday night, Tuesday night? And I've got this here. I definitely think making something like this grid is a good idea, especially based on what I'm saying about getting bursts of focus. So the idea as well of looking at some revision cards. What was the first topic you studied in your National Fives this year? Do you remember it? Can you go back? Because you'll have learned loads since then. You'll have done those. And also, most importantly, we've just come off a holiday, and we all know what it's like when we come off a holiday. We can't remember our own names sometimes about what we did. What were we doing before the holidays? Oh my goodness, so they're asking about that. I don't remember. That sort of thing. So plan in time as well for you might forget stuff. So the plan was to spend an hour in biology, but actually you ended up spending an hour and a half in biology because you'd forgotten your stuff and you had to look it over, you had to read it, you had to check your revision cards because you may make cards. And the point is you go back to them and you think, I don't know what that means. I know I made a to-do list before the October break, and I came back and I didn't know what some of it meant because it had gone completely out my head. So it's that thing as well of that constant checking in with yourself. And some days you're just not going to be in the right frame of mind and it's going to be challenging. But use the feedback from your teacher, the learner conversations you have with your teachers, because sometimes pupils come to me and they say, I'm going to learn the whole of RUE and I'm going to learn all my poems and you can't do all of that. How are you going to do all of that? So I normally say it's a type of question you've got to look at, or this is your weakest poem. When you did work on this in class, this was your weakest poem. Start with that, learn that one first, and then go back to the others. So something like this planner could be quite useful, especially if you've got a job and things like that, or you've got family commitments and things, or you've got football training on a Wednesday night and stuff like that, so that you can build it in. And it's not about spending 7 hours a night on revising. You do need to switch off and let your brain shut down for a while. But, and there is a but, the only problem with never revising is, and the fact you've come here tonight would indicate that you are not my target audience for this chat, but I'll say it anyway so that you can tell your pals I said it and things, is if you leave it all to the night before, I really hope based on what I'm saying, that you already know what I'm going to say, is you're going to ask your brain to do too much. Now, cramming can work, and people are going to tell me, I crammed, it was fine. Scientific research says that cramming works in the short term. So if you need to get a lot of information in your brain the night before and then you're doing a test, that's okay. If, however, you need that information later in the year or next year, you might forget. So this is why when people tell me I crammed for my national fives, higher will be fine. And then they come back later on and they say, actually, I don't know why I can't do this. I knew it last year. It's possibly because they've crammed it. They've not been retrieving it out their brain, because the recurring theme of this is retrieving it out of your brain for long periods of time. This is why we all still know the alphabet really well. It's why we all still know our times tables, which I always think is a really good example. I can't say, obviously, we all have to count and things, but I can't say, 7 times 6 is 42, something you do all the time, but it gets drilled so far into that brain and you're constantly tested on it when you're young that you never forget it. So it's one of those things where putting the short bursts of time in to study things, and maybe using things like the mind maps or the revision cards, or a little bit of, online chat with your pals where it's like, right, okay, 10 things about Nazi Germany, 10 things about the Reform Act, that sort of thing can help, rather than, okay, I'm only working on a Sunday before the test, and then come at 11:30, there's a meltdown because it's not going in, because you're asking your short-term memory to just do too much work. And to be honest, there's nothing parents can really do at that point, because once you're emotional and once you're upset and once they're up here, and there's nothing you can do. All you can do is sort of calm them down. But then it's, I'm going to fail. And I have no easy answer for that beyond having a plan in advance as much as they can. There will be information coming out about when the fabs are and tests and things like that. And I can't really answer specifics on fabs just now, but Mr. Auld will be sharing everything with them. And that will also give them an idea of how they're going to be spreading the revision. Teachers will be able to give them really specific advice. Obviously, I'll be giving really rubbish general examples about other subjects, but I hope that helps with the idea of what will work and what won't. And I think it's remembering it's a marathon, not a sprint. The exams are in May, and there's a lot of work to be done then. A lot of low stakes and high stakes assessments in school. You get a lot of little quizzes in school where you're allowed to make a mistake in a Kahoot. No one minds. It's that idea. And the problem with Kahoot, though, is it times you. It rewards a quick answer, not necessarily just the right answer. But those things can help, definitely. So I hope that makes sense. I am going to shut up shortly. The final advice I have for you then, to summarise it, is active over passive. Things that are involving getting things out your long-term memory and putting them back in. That idea of that jumping between short and long-term, studying it tonight so I can remember it in a few weeks, that sort of thing, and doing little and often. Quality over quantity. It's not about doing hours and hours and hours, especially if rewriting your notes and just highlighting them, and you're not reading them, you're just copying. Copying's fine if you're actively engaged with it. So it's that idea of quality active tasks. Cramming only works in the short term. It's not a long-term strategy. So it will save you potentially if you've got a test you forgot about, but it won't work long-term. And it's also why it can be quite easy for, especially in classes, for you to know something at the start of October and have forgotten it by December, okay? And then, so spacing this out, return to topics. Returning to things, it's not a bad thing to, be like, oh, good, I do know that. I've nailed that, right? I've got it. Because, I've talked about some negative emotion. The positive emotion of being quite reassured is powerful as well. Okay, so it's not about just block revision of one topic all the time. Come back to other things as well. And as you start to make the links between things, some of the work you do in RUE in English is what you're doing in Duffy. It just seems different. Okay, but quoting a simile and explaining it, or quoting word choice and explaining it, is the same in both papers. Okay, it's just easier for Duffy because the teacher can prepare you with the answers. So it's one of those things where looking at what you know is just as powerful. Okay, so I'm going to stop now. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. I hope that some of that makes sense. I know I have absolutely monologued at y'all. So let me know if there's anything, if you would like to ask a question, you can pop it in the chat. I don't know if there are any. How long roughly should you study a day? Now, that depends on, that is a really good question. That depends on the person. I also think it depends on your day. Now, some days at school, we have our long days and we have our short days, but I can imagine that some of you have days, as adults do, where you come home and you're fine, but you come home some days and you're burst, you're exhausted, and you've maybe done a lot of big concepts at school. You might have done some big tests at school that day. So I think you have to be flexible. And I think it depends on what you've got going on at home as well. You know, if you've got wee siblings running around and you help look after them, or you've got a job, you've got to work around that. There is no answer. You're not going to like the answer to my question. That I'm not going to have a perfect answer for you here. I mean, what I would say is it would also depend on how much you feel you've got to revise, okay, as well. I mean, it's one of those things I could easily say, oh, you've got to do 2 hours a night. But the thing is, it comes back to quality over quantity. If you've only got 15 minutes in you, of right, I've got a biology test, but I'm exhausted. I've got to go see my gran. I've got, mum says I've got to go do this. I've only got an hour tonight. Then you make that time count. But I would make a wee planner of what you think will work for you. And then again, like I say, I would maybe have it in half-hour blocks. Okay. Are there template planners available? Yes. Now, apparently, there's a whole load of resources available. So, what we're going to do is we're going to make them available in the Google Classrooms for 4th, 5th, and 6th year. I also, like I said at the 4th year assembly, I'm happy to do a session with you in school where we could give you some stuff out and maybe you make your revision planner there. Remember, it will also be up to you what's in it. Okay. And it may be that some of you are amazing at maths. You barely revise maths, but you actually feel that English is a nightmare and that needs more of your time. So I think for each of you it would look different. And that's why this is always so hard, because like I said at the start, it's so personal to each pupil's ability, attitude to learning, in terms of the subject, how confident they feel in what they've learned. So I know I'm being a bit vague here, but we will give you some, and then you might be like, that's not working for me. And sometimes what's not working is just as important. You can say, right, I've made this and this is better. But no, we'll absolutely give you some stuff. Anything else? Apparently tonight is also being recorded, much to my absolute mortification. So we're going to make it available as well. So if you think, oh, she said something and I can't quite remember, or you want to check it over, you'll be able to do that as well. I think I've kind of covered it, Mr. Grimmer. Have I? Is there anything you think?
No, I think it was absolutely fabulous, Miss Leach.
Oh, thank you. It's that awkward COVID thing where I feel like I'm just talking out loud to myself, and you don't know if you're making sense at all. But if anyone else has any questions, if you want to ask, but you don't want to ask in front of the rest of the class, we will stay on a little bit at the end. Although I got 2 really good questions there, even though you can tell I kind of dodged perfect answers on them. But yeah, I hope it's been helpful. It just giving you an idea of what works and what doesn't. And trial and error is really important. Okay. And yeah, like Mr. Grimmer's just written there, you can always pop by. You know where my office is, you know where the year team base is. So if you're like, and you mentioned this, I won't be able to tell you if your revision cards on PE or maths are any good. You really do need your teacher for that. And there's nothing wrong with going to your teacher and saying, look, I was at the study skills thing and Miss Leach was talking about this stuff. What do you think I should do? Or what works in your subject? Because obviously subjects all have their different nuances as well. We're all similar and different. So that can help. But I tried to pick things that crossed over subject lines, as it were. So I hope that helps. Like I say, if there's anything else, we're going to finish on time, which is impressive for me, I have to say. But if there's anything, please let me know. Otherwise, feel free to enjoy your evening. I can't thank you enough for coming along. I appreciate after a day at work, it can be another hour out of your evening. So thank you so much for coming. But yeah, thank you. So, and I'll see some of you at school. Oh, you're welcome. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you all for coming.